The laugh spread across the glass conference room like spilled champagne. Loud, sparkling, careless. Nobody noticed how her fingers stopped moving over the notebook. Nobody noticed how the city lights reflected in her coffee had gone completely still. But 3 days later, when emergency calls started tearing through the executive floor at 2 a.m., every person in that room would remember the exact expression on her face. Especially the CEO. Monday mornings in the 27 etage headquarters always smelled the same. Expensive coffee, printer toner, and quiet panic disguised as ambition. People walked quickly there, not because they were busy, because slowing down meant someone senior might notice you breathing without permission. Emma Vale crossed the lobby with her usual calm stride, one hand holding a tablet, the other adjusting the sleeve of her graphite gray blazer. The security guard near the elevators nodded almost automatically. "Morning, Miss Vale," she smiled politely, not warmly. Warmth in that building was treated like inefficiency. Behind the marble walls and floor-to-ceiling windows, Helix Nova looked untouchable, a consulting giant specializing in enterprise infrastructure migrations, the kind of company that moved banks, healthcare systems, and global retailers from one technological universe into another, without allowing a single customer to notice the transition. At least that was the marketing version. The reality was held together by a handful of exhausted specialists nobody appreciated until they disappeared. Emma was one of them. Actually, not one of them, the one. She stepped into the elevator as two junior analysts rushed in behind her, carrying laptops and the emotional stability of hunted rabbits. "Did you finish the Carlson rollback report?" one whispered. "No, because legal change requirements at midnight." "They always do." Emma listened without reacting. The elevator climbed silently through numbers glowing gold above the door. The doors opened into controlled chaos. Phones ringing, screens flashing, half-drunk coffees abandoned like battlefield relics. And in the center of it all stood Martin Kessler, CEO. Expensive smile, silver tie, perfect posture. The kind of man who looked handcrafted by a branding agency. He was laughing, not genuinely, executively. The surrounding managers laughed too, half a second later, like synchronized software updates. Emma walked past them toward her office. "Emma," Martin called casually. "Conference room in 10, budget review." She stopped. Budget review. Interesting, nobody warned her about budget reviews unless someone upstairs had already made a decision. "Understood," she replied. Martin gave her a bright corporate smile that never reached his eyes. "Try not to destroy my financial optimism today." A few people chuckled. Emma smiled back with surgical politeness and kept walking. Inside her office, the silence felt different, cleaner, honest. No motivational posters, no fake plants, no framed leadership quotes pretending exhaustion was passion. Only 3 monitors, organized reports, and a whiteboard filled with migration dependency maps, complicated enough to make most executives physically uncomfortable. She placed her tablet down and opened the overnight alerts. Red, too much red. The Valamont financial migration was entering critical synchronization phase. A $240 million client transition involving 12 countries, 4 legacy banking systems, and enough regulatory exposure to give lawyers migraines for generations. Emma had designed the architecture herself. Every fallback, every contingency, every operational sequence. There were only 4 people in the company capable of managing it safely, and only one person who understood all of it completely. Her. A message appeared on screen. "CFO review, reduction strategy approved." She leaned back slowly. Reduction strategy. There it was, the corporate phrase people used when they wanted to sound intelligent while cutting arteries. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel from infrastructure stepped inside carefully. "You saw the notice?" "Yes." He closed the door behind him. "That bad?" Emma looked at him for a moment. Daniel had been with the company 8 years. Smart, reliable, permanently tired. "The question," she said quietly, "is whether they understand what they're cutting." Daniel gave a dry laugh. So, no then. Outside the glass walls of her office, employees moved between desks under white lighting that made everyone look slightly unreal, like actors pretending to enjoy corporate life in a commercial nobody believed. Daniel lowered his voice. I heard procurement wants to outsource part of migration support. Emma finally looked up sharply. To who? Vector Dynamics. A pause. That name landed differently. Vector Dynamics, Helix Nova's fastest growing competitor. Smaller, more aggressive, less bureaucracy, rumored to pay people based on actual competence instead of political survival skills. Emma turned back toward the monitor. Interesting. Very interesting. You know what scares me? Daniel said. She raised an eyebrow. They don't even realize clients trust you more than they trust the company. That sentence stayed hanging in the air, heavy, dangerous, because it was true. Executives loved pretending clients signed contracts because of branding decks and polished presentations. But massive migrations were built on trust between human beings under pressure, and Valamont Financial trusted Emma completely. She had spent 19 months earning that trust through sleepless calls, emergency fixes, impossible deadlines, and the rare ability to remain calm while entire systems burned around her. Martin saw numbers. The CFO saw percentages. The client saw her. Another message flashed on her monitor. Boardroom, 10 a.m. Daniel sighed. Well, he muttered, good luck surviving another ceremonial execution. Emma stood calmly. No, she said softly while closing her tablet. Something tells me this morning will be educational. The boardroom overlooked the city like a throne room built for modern emperors. Glass walls, black stone table, a skyline sharp enough to cut confidence out of junior employees. The CFO was already there flipping through financial projections with the enthusiasm of a man emotionally married to spreadsheets. Martin stood near the windows, speaking to two board members. Nobody smiled when Emma entered. That alone told her everything. She took her seat. The CFO adjusted his glasses. Let's begin. Slides appeared across the massive screen. Operational costs, compensation ratios, department efficiency metrics, the usual theater. Then her name appeared. Emma Vale, Senior Migration Director. A number underneath it glowed like an accusation. 11%. The CFO folded his hands. As everyone here knows, labor concentration risk has become a concern. Translation: one employee earns too much influence. Martin leaned casually against the table. We appreciate your contributions, Emma, immensely. Corporate language again, the verbal equivalent of flowers before demolition. The CFO continued. With restructuring ahead, we're evaluating sustainability models. Emma remained silent. That unsettled them more than arguments would have. One board member cleared his throat. The concern is dependency. Too much operational reliance on a single individual creates vulnerability. Interesting logic. Punish the person preventing vulnerability because they became essential solving the problems leadership created. Emma almost admired the elegance of the stupidity. Martin smiled suddenly, relaxed, confident. Then came the sentence. For that 11%, we can hire 2 people like you. Laughter. Real laughter this time. Short, sharp, careless. Someone tapped the table. Another executive smirked into his coffee. The room warmed with the comfort powerful people feel when humiliating someone they assume cannot fight back. Emma looked around slowly. Not angry, not emotional. That was what confused them. Because humiliation only works when the other person accepts the rules of the stage. She simply opened her folder, removed one sheet of paper, signed it. The sound of the pen against paper was almost absurdly quiet compared to the city outside. Then she slid the resignation letter across the table. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Dangerous silence. Martin's smile weakened slightly. The CFO blinked. One board member actually leaned forward. Emma stood, calmly, gracefully, like someone leaving a restaurant after realizing the food wasn't worth finishing. "You should absolutely hire two people like me," she said softly. "I strongly encourage it." Martin straightened. "Emma, let's not overreact." "I'm not reacting." Her voice stayed smooth as glass. "That's the part you're misunderstanding." Then she picked up her tablet and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped her immediately, because nobody in that room yet understood what had actually happened. But somewhere far below the tower, traffic moved through rain-slick streets and inside another building across the city. A competitor's executive phone had already started ringing. And before the week ended, Helix Nova would discover the difference between replacing an employee and replacing the person quietly holding the entire structure together. The rain started 15 minutes after Emma left the building. Not dramatic rain, not cinematic thunderstorm rain. Just cold, steady water sliding down the glass towers of downtown, like the city itself was slowly dissolving. Perfect timing. Emma stood beneath the awning across the street, watching employees move behind the illuminated windows of Helix Nova headquarters. Tiny silhouettes, tiny ambitions, tiny fears carefully dressed in business casual. Her company access card was still warm in her pocket. Technically, she could still walk back upstairs. Technically, Martin Kessler probably expected her to. Executives like him always believed talented people were bluffing, because in their world, everyone eventually chose security over dignity. Her phone vibrated. Daniel. "You actually did it?" Emma smiled faintly. "Emma." "Yes." 3 dots appeared instantly, disappeared, returned again. "Daniel." "The CFO looks like someone unplugged his life support." That almost made her laugh. Almost. A black car slowed beside the sidewalk. Smooth, quiet, expensive without needing to announce it. The rear window lowered halfway. Nathan Cole sat inside. Vector Dynamics, Chief Strategy Officer. Tall, composed, dark navy coat, eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He had the unsettling calm of a chess player watching 3 moves ahead while everyone else argued about the current turn. "You move quickly," he said. Emma crossed her arms. "You move faster." Nathan glanced toward the Helix Nova tower. "We monitor structural instability in the market." "Is that what they call corporate scavenging now?" "One company's collapse," he replied evenly, "is another company's recruitment strategy." Fair answer. Rain reflected across the car door like liquid mercury. Nathan opened the door slightly. "Coffee?" Emma studied him for a second. This wasn't random. Vector had been circling Helix Nova accounts for months. Quietly, patiently, like wolves testing electric fences. And now, Helix Nova had just unplugged its own perimeter system. She entered the car. Inside smelled faintly of leather and espresso. No loud music, no forced small talk, just controlled silence while the city moved around them in blurred reflections. Nathan handed her a tablet. On screen was a proposal already prepared. No surprise there either. "You had this ready before the meeting ended?" Emma observed. "Before the meeting started." She looked at him. Nathan didn't smile. "We knew they were underestimating you," he said calmly. "We just didn't know whether you had finally become tired of it." The car stopped near a quiet cafe overlooking the river. Minimalist interior, warm lighting, the kind of place executives used when they wanted confidential conversations without looking suspicious. They sat near the windows. Outside, neon signs trembled in puddles. Nathan folded his hands. "I'll save you the performance," he said. "We want Valemont direct." Good. Emma appreciated direct people. They were rare in corporate ecosystems built entirely from decorative dishonesty. "You think they'll follow me?" "We know they trust you." A server placed coffee between them. "Dark roast, no sugar." "Correct." "Interesting." Nathan continued. Helix Nova built a brand. You built operational confidence. Those are different assets. Emma leaned back slightly. And your offer? He slid the tablet toward her again. The number was aggressive. Not just salary, authority, control over migration architecture, direct influence over staffing, no executive committee approval chains, no CFO interference, no political theater. For a moment, Emma simply stared at the screen, while soft jazz played somewhere behind the cafe counter. It felt strange. Not the offer itself, the absence of disrespect. Nathan watched her carefully. You know what your former company misunderstood? He asked quietly. Emma lifted her eyes. They thought burnout looks dramatic. He paused. But usually it looks exactly like competence, right until the competent person stops showing up. Silence settled between them. Outside, traffic lights shifted from red to green across wet streets. Emma remembered the boardroom laughter. For that 11%, we can hire 2 people like you. The sentence replayed itself with almost mathematical precision now. Not painful anymore, just revealing. Nathan broke the silence. We're not hiring you because you're loyal, he said. Loyalty is unstable. We're hiring you because you understand systems under pressure. That line landed harder than corporate flattery ever could, because it acknowledged reality. Not emotion, not ego. Reality. Emma closed the tablet. When do you need an answer? Nathan's expression barely changed. Honestly? Yes. We already moved the legal team into position. She almost laughed this time. Efficient predators. At Helix Nova, decisions required 12 meetings and 3 emotional support PowerPoints. At Vector, they prepared contracts before conversations finished. Nathan leaned slightly forward. There's something else you should know. His tone changed. Smaller, sharper. Valamont contacted us 2 hours ago. Emma's eyes narrowed. Already? They heard rumors about the restructuring meeting. Of course they did. Large enterprise clients always knew everything before executives realized information was leaking. Assistants talked, managers panicked, consultants whispered during airport layovers. Corporate secrecy was mostly a myth maintained by people who never paid attention. Nathan continued carefully. They asked one question. Emma already knew the question, but she let him say it. Is Emma staying with Helix Nova? The cafe suddenly felt quieter. Not externally, internally. Because there it was, the real balance sheet. Not salary percentages, not budget charts. Trust. And trust moved markets faster than executives understood. Emma looked back toward the rain-covered skyline where Helix Nova's tower disappeared into low clouds. Somewhere up there, Martin was probably still trying to regain control of the narrative. Maybe reassuring the board. Maybe joking about temporary emotional reactions. Maybe convincing himself talented people were replaceable, because admitting otherwise would force him to confront how fragile his empire actually was. Nathan's phone vibrated once on the table. He checked the screen briefly. No visible reaction. That usually meant the message mattered. What happened? Emma asked. Nathan locked the phone. Your CFO just scheduled an emergency operations review. Fast, very fast. Emma slowly stirred her coffee, though she hadn't added anything to it. They've realized. Nathan nodded once. Not fully. A pause. Just enough to become afraid. The rain intensified outside. Water streamed down the windows in silver rivers, while evening traffic crawled beneath glowing advertisements and mirrored skyscrapers. Emma suddenly imagined the Helix Nova executive floor right now. Conference rooms filling, voices tightening, project managers refreshing dashboards every 30 seconds. Someone from finance asking whether migration documentation was fully transferable. Someone from legal wondering if non-compete clauses would survive court. Someone from operations quietly realizing most of the emergency escalation procedures existed only inside Emma's head. Panic in corporations rarely arrived loudly. Usually it entered through silence, through delayed replies, through executives suddenly saying, "Let's regroup" 3 times in one meeting. Nathan finished his coffee. "If you join us," he said, "there will be backlash. Expected. Helix Nova will call it betrayal." Emma looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "They'll call it betrayal because they confused ownership with employment." For the first time that evening, Nathan smiled properly. Not polished, not strategic, genuine. And that was somehow more dangerous. His phone vibrated again. This time he turned the screen toward her. A single internal market alert. Valamont Financial, executive concern escalation. Emma read it silently, then exhaled once, slowly. Somewhere across the city, executives who laughed 3 hours ago were no longer laughing. And deep inside Helix Nova's illuminated tower, people had started realizing a terrifying possibility. Emma Vale hadn't left a company. She had left with the map. If this story pulled you into the tension of glass towers, silent power games, and the moment one decision changes everything, stay with me. Because the next chapters won't just show panic inside Helix Nova. They'll show what happens when executives realize too late that loyalty cannot be calculated in spreadsheets, and that one underestimated person can move an entire market without raising their voice. Continue reading if you're ready for the fallout. By Wednesday morning, Helix Nova headquarters no longer felt like a corporation. It felt like an airport 10 minutes after someone mentioned the word security breach. Too many people walking too fast. Too many doors closing halfway through conversations. Too many executives suddenly using phrases like containment strategy and operational continuity while trying not to sound afraid. Fear in corporate environments had its own etiquette. Nobody admitted it directly. They converted it into meetings. The emergency operations review had started at 6:30 a.m. By 7:10, 3 department heads were blaming each other using PowerPoint slides. By 800, the CFO had stopped pretending the situation was manageable. And at 8:17, the first Valamont escalation email arrived. Martin Kessler read it twice, then a third time. Not because the message was complicated, because denial often required repetition. The executive conference room glowed pale blue under oversized screens, displaying migration timelines, staffing allocations, risk maps, and a growing list of unanswered client concerns. At the center of it all sat one blinking notification: Primary Migration Authority, unassigned. It looked obscene, like discovering the pilot had left mid-flight. The CFO adjusted his tie for the 5th time in 20 minutes. "Where is the transition documentation?" Operations answered carefully. She maintained most critical escalation logic personally. Martin looked up sharply. "What does that mean exactly?" Nobody wanted to answer that. Finally, Daniel spoke. "It means the system documentation exists," he said cautiously. "But understanding why certain safeguards were implemented requires context." The CFO stared. Context? Daniel chose his next words very carefully. "You don't replace 19 months of architectural decisions with a folder." Silence. One of the board members rubbed his forehead slowly. Outside the glass walls, assistants moved like frightened fish through corridors flooded with tension. The atmosphere had changed overnight. People sensed instability long before official announcements arrived. That was another corporate truth executives ignored. Employees always knew first. Martin stood suddenly and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Rain clouds still hung low above downtown, turning the skyline gray and metallic. "She's doing this deliberately," he muttered. Daniel almost responded immediately. Almost. But stopping himself half a second too late was still enough. Martin turned. "You disagree?" Careful territory now. Everyone in the room felt it. Daniel folded his hands. "I think," he said slowly, "Emma resigned after being publicly humiliated." The room tightened. Not emotionally, structurally, like a building reacting to pressure deep inside its foundation. The CFO scoffed. Oh, please, senior leadership discussions aren't humiliation. Daniel looked at him. No, he replied quietly. Usually they're just expensive mistakes wearing confident expressions. Nobody breathed for a second. Martin's jaw hardened. But before he could respond, another alert appeared on screen. Valamont Financial requesting executive assurance call. Priority red. The CFO swore under his breath. One board member whispered, "Already?" Yes, already. Because massive clients monitored instability the way sailors watched weather. They noticed tiny changes in tone, delayed replies, leadership reshuffles, missing names from email chains. And Emma's absence was not tiny. It was seismic. Meanwhile, 23 floors below, employees gathered near coffee stations pretending not to discuss the disaster while discussing absolutely nothing else. She really left? I heard security escorted her out. No, she walked out herself. Someone said Vector hired her the same night. Valamont's freaking out. Good. That last word came quietly, almost accidentally, but several people heard it. Because beneath the polished surface of Helix Nova lived years of exhaustion, ignored warnings, canceled vacations, midnight deadlines, and executives treating people like replaceable wiring inside expensive machinery. Emma leaving felt dangerous, but to some employees, it also felt strangely satisfying, like watching someone finally say the thing everyone else was too dependent to admit. Upstairs, the emergency call with Valamont began badly and somehow deteriorated from there. 3 executives from the client side appeared on screen. None looked relaxed, especially not Adrian Mercer, Valamont's CFO, a man famous for speaking calmly right before destroying million-dollar contracts. Martin smiled professionally. Adrian, thank you for making time this morning. We didn't make time, Adrian replied flatly. We lost sleep. Excellent start. Martin continued anyway. I want to personally assure you the migration remains fully operational. Adrian leaned back slowly. Then why did my team discover your lead migration architect resigned through industry channels instead of through you? Nobody moved. The CFO opened his mouth, closed it again. Martin adjusted course instantly. Emma's departure will not affect deliverables. Another silence. Adrian's expression barely changed. That was worse than anger, because angry clients still wanted explanations. Calm clients were already calculating exits. Mr. Kessler, Adrian said quietly, 3 months ago your own leadership team told us Ms. Vale was mission critical. Martin forced a smile. And we have an excellent bench of talent supporting her. Adrian nodded slowly. Then put whoever designed the rollback stabilization sequence on this call. The room froze. Because there was no whoever. There was only Emma. The pause lasted 2 seconds, 3 at most. But in executive negotiations, 3 seconds could sound like a confession. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. Experienced CFOs survived by measuring hesitation. Finally, Daniel spoke carefully. That specific architecture was developed collaboratively. Adrian looked directly into the camera. With respect, he replied. That sounded rehearsed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Martin stepped in again. We're fully committed to continuity. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Continuity requires trust. Then came the sentence nobody upstairs was prepared for. Is Emma Vale joining Vector Dynamics? Nobody answered quickly enough. And there it was again. Silence. Not absence of sound. Absence of control. Martin finally responded. We cannot comment on competitor speculation. Adrian gave a tiny nod, which somehow felt worse than shouting. Understood. The call ended 4 minutes later. No one spoke immediately afterward. The CFO stared at the dark screen. Martin remained motionless near the windows. Then operations quietly updated the internal risk forecast. Projected exposure if Valamont suspended migration, $240 million. The number appeared in cold white text beneath cascading operational models. Nobody blinked, nobody joked, nobody laughed about 11% anymore. And somewhere across the city, inside Vector Dynamics' quieter, sharper headquarters, Emma stood before a wall-sized migration map, while engineers listened carefully to every word she said. No interruptions, no condescending smiles, no executive theater, only focus, only competence. And for the first time in years, the room around her didn't feel like something she needed to survive. It felt like something she could finally build inside. Vector Dynamics operated differently. Emma noticed it within the first hour. At Helix Nova, leadership floated above reality like luxury drones, visible, expensive, and mostly decorative during actual emergencies. At Vector, executives sat inside the operational floor itself. No isolated corner offices. No cathedral-sized boardrooms designed to intimidate interns. Just long rows of glass workspaces humming with quiet concentration, screens glowing beneath warm industrial lighting, and conversations stripped of corporate perfume. The atmosphere felt dangerous in a completely different way. Efficient, dangerous. The kind where people either performed well or disappeared naturally without requiring 12 months of political theater. Emma stood near the central migration wall while teams updated live infrastructure feeds across massive displays. Colored status indicators shifted constantly. Green, amber, red, a living nervous system. Nathan walked beside her holding 2 coffees. "You're being watched," he said casually. "By competitors?" "By our own people." Emma accepted the coffee. "And?" Nathan glanced toward the engineering floor. "They're trying to understand why Helix Nova panicked." Interesting answer. Not why she left. Why Helix Nova panicked. That distinction mattered. Because experienced operators knew talent departures happened every day. But emergency executive reviews, client escalation calls, and overnight legal meetings, those only happened when someone irreplaceable vanished. A young systems architect approached carefully. "Nathan, Valamont's external monitoring traffic just spiked." Nathan nodded once. "Expected." The architect hesitated before looking at Emma. Then, "Is it true you designed the adaptive rollback mesh alone?" Emma answered without ego. "No system that large is built alone." The architect smiled nervously. "But you were the only one maintaining it." That spread through the room faster than anyone admitted. Not gossip. Recognition. There was a difference. Meanwhile, across the city, Helix Nova's executive floor had entered the psychological stage known as searching for someone else to blame. An external consultant had been brought in before noon, which was executive language for, "We need an expensive stranger to repeat what employees already told us." The consultant reviewed the migration structure for 43 minutes before removing his glasses slowly. Who approved concentration of institutional knowledge at this level? Nobody answered immediately, because everybody in the room suddenly remembered exactly who had approved it. Them. Year after year. Every time Emma requested additional staffing. Every time she warned timelines were unrealistic. Every time she explained the migration complexity was exceeding safe operational thresholds. The warnings existed. Buried inside archived emails executives skimmed between golf weekends and leadership retreats. The consultant continued. "This architecture wasn't dangerous because she became essential." He paused. "It became dangerous because leadership enjoyed the convenience of her competence." That sentence hit the room like dropped glass. The CFO shifted uncomfortably. Martin remained expressionless. But expressionless people often thought the loudest, especially when reality finally cornered them. Back at Vector, Emma entered the strategy room where engineers and operations leads gathered around a digital projection of the Valamont migration ecosystem. Dozens of interconnected systems glowed across the display like illuminated arteries. Nathan spoke first. We need probability estimates. One analyst adjusted the model. If Helix Nova loses escalation trust, Valamont freezes migration within 7 business days. Another analyst added, and if migration freezes, secondary regional clients begin risk reassessment. Nathan looked toward Emma. How bad does this become? Everyone in the room watched her. Not because of hierarchy, because they understood she actually knew. Emma studied the projection silently. Then, Helix Nova's problem isn't technical. A few heads turned. It's psychological. Nathan leaned slightly against the table. Explain. They still think this is about replacing labor. She zoomed into the migration dependency chains. But enterprise clients don't buy labor. They buy certainty. The room stayed completely still. Emma continued calmly. The moment leadership publicly demonstrated they didn't understand what protected the system. She tapped the screen lightly. The client stopped trusting leadership. No dramatic speech, no theatrical delivery, just precision, which somehow sounded more devastating. One engineer muttered quietly, Jesus. Nathan almost smiled. Exactly. A notification appeared on the side display. New industry report. Helix Nova faces internal stability concerns amid executive transition. The article had already started spreading. Fast. Because financial media loved bloodless disasters. The elegant kind involving billion-dollar systems collapsing beneath polished executive smiles. Emma barely reacted. But inside Helix Nova headquarters, the article detonated like a grenade wrapped in headlines. Phones exploded, investors called, board members demanded explanations. PR teams started manufacturing reassuring language at industrial scale. And somewhere during the chaos, Martin finally opened Emma's old operational archive personally. Folders, risk assessments, migration contingency trees, emergency override protocols, thousands of notes written at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4:47 a.m. Quiet evidence of someone carrying impossible responsibility while executives debated percentages. Then he found a flagged internal memo from 8 months earlier. Subject: critical dependency risk. Immediate action recommended. He opened it. Emma's writing was clean, direct, almost painfully restrained. If leadership continues minimizing architectural staffing requirements, Helix Nova may eventually face operational fragility severe enough to threaten enterprise continuity during executive turnover or client escalation events. Martin stared at the sentence. Below it sat his own response. Reviewed. Current staffing model remains financially optimal. Financially optimal. The word suddenly looked ridiculous, like using discount tape to repair an aircraft wing. Outside his office, executives argued across overlapping conference calls, while legal teams prepared retention offers for remaining senior staff. Too late. Everyone knew it was too late, because panic traveled downward faster than confidence ever traveled upward, and employees were already updating resumes. Meanwhile, evening settled softly over Vector Dynamics. Warm gold lights reflected across polished concrete floors, while teams continued working with focused intensity. No one raised their voice. No one performed urgency theatrically. They simply solved problems. Emma stood alone briefly near the windows overlooking the city. Helix Nova's tower glowed in the distance through mist and rain, beautiful from far away, like many dangerous things. Nathan approached quietly. You miss it? Emma considered the question honestly, then shook her head. No, she said. What do you miss? She looked at the skyline for a long moment. The version of it that existed before leadership confused survival with intelligence. Nathan nodded slowly. He understood, because every company eventually reached that crossroads. The moment executives forgot the machinery was human. The moment spreadsheets started sounding more trustworthy than the people actually preventing collapse. And when that happens, failure rarely arrives like an explosion. Usually it arrives smiling, laughing, making jokes about percentages, right until the silence begins. Thursday, 4:12 a.m. The lights were still on inside Helix Nova headquarters. At that hour, the building looked less like a global consulting empire and more like a stranded ship refusing to admit water was already inside the walls. Entire floors remained awake. Operations teams slept in chairs. Assistants carried coffee with the exhausted precision of battlefield medics. Conference room doors opened and closed every few minutes, releasing fragments of panic into the hallways. Client assurance package. Legal needs approval. Who authorized that statement? No, don't send that yet. And somewhere beneath all the noise lived a single terrifying reality nobody could professionally phrase. Emma had not merely resigned. She had taken confidence with her. Martin Kessler stood alone in his office, staring at the skyline, washed pale blue by approaching dawn. He hadn't gone home, not because of dedication, because executives under pressure stopped trusting silence. Silence allowed thinking. Thinking became dangerous. His desk was covered with printed reports now, something he normally mocked older executives for doing. Digital dashboards no longer felt sufficient when everything important seemed to be slipping between numbers. Another message arrived from Valamont. Subject line, request for strategic review. Corporate language again, cold, polite, potentially catastrophic. Martin opened it slowly. Valamont requested a temporary pause on Phase 3 migration activities pending leadership stability clarification. A pause. That single word could destroy quarters of projected revenue, maybe entire fiscal forecasts. The CFO entered without knocking. He looked 10 years older than Monday. We have another problem. Martin laughed once under his breath. At this point, I'd be concerned if we didn't. The CFO dropped a folder onto the desk. 3 senior engineers submitted resignation notices overnight. Martin closed his eyes briefly. Contagion. That was the real danger now. Not Emma alone, the realization she created. Because once employees watch someone walk away from disrespect without collapsing financially or professionally, the psychological balance changed, fear weakened, and corporations depended heavily on carefully managed fear. The CFO sat heavily across from him. We need damage control immediately. Martin looked toward the dark windows. No, he said quietly. We needed damage control before the boardroom meeting. The CFO said nothing, because there it was, the sentence nobody wanted spoken aloud, the exact moment the trajectory shifted. One careless laugh, one executive joke, one assumption that competence would tolerate humiliation indefinitely because it always had before. Outside, rain drifted softly across the city. Inside Vector Dynamics, the atmosphere felt entirely different, focused, controlled, alive. Emma stood beside a wall of live migration analytics, while engineers finalized revised stabilization pathways for potential Valamont transfer scenarios. Nobody hovered over her shoulder. Nobody questioned whether expertise was cost-efficient. They simply listened when she spoke. It still felt unfamiliar. A senior engineer named Priya adjusted one of the transition models. If Valamont moves, she said carefully, Helix Nova's regional portfolio destabilizes within 2 quarters. Nathan leaned against the table. Conservative estimate? Priya nodded. Emma watched the projections silently. Numbers pulsed softly across the screens like heart monitors. Strange how corporations looked immortal from the outside while internally surviving month to month on trust, exhaustion, and a handful of people quietly solving impossible problems. Nathan studied her expression. You're not enjoying this, Emma answered honestly. I'm not enjoying watching preventable stupidity become expensive. That earned several quiet smiles around the room, because everyone there had lived through some version of it. The universal corporate disease, leadership mistaking endurance for infinite capacity. A notification appeared across the main display. Incoming call. Adrian Mercer, Valemount's CFO. The room became still. Nathan looked toward Emma. You want this? She considered for half a second, then nodded. The call connected. Adrian Mercer appeared on screen from a dark office somewhere in London, city lights reflecting behind him. He looked tired, but precise. The dangerous kind of tired. Ah, Miss Vale, he said calmly. Adrian. No excessive formalities. People under real pressure abandon decorative communication first. Adrian folded his hands. I'll be direct. Good. A faint, almost smile touched his expression. We're reviewing strategic continuity options. Translation. Valemount was preparing an exit route. Nathan remained silent beside her. Smart move. Adrian continued. My board has one primary concern. Emma already knew. Again, trust, not software, not infrastructure, trust. Adrian looked directly at her through the screen. Wherever this migration continues, he said quietly, we need certainty the people responsible actually understand it. The room around Emma stayed silent. Outside Vector's windows, dawn slowly began spilling silver light across the city skyline. Helix Nova's tower stood visible in the distance, cold, rigid, beautiful in the way abandoned things sometimes were. Emma answered carefully. You're asking whether I believe Helix Nova can safely complete the migration. Adrian did not blink. Yes. No politics left now, no branding language, only reality standing naked under fluorescent lights. Emma exhaled slowly. Then, I believe Helix Nova still has talented people. True. Very true. But talent without operational trust becomes fragile under pressure. Also true. Adrian nodded once. Like a man hearing confirmation for conclusions he had already reached alone at 2 a.m. We'll be making decisions quickly, he said. I assumed you would. The call ended. Nobody in the room spoke immediately afterward. Finally, Priya whispered, That sounded expensive? Nathan gave a quiet laugh. No, he replied. That sounded inevitable. Hours later, inside Helix Nova headquarters, the official internal report finally arrived. Projected exposure associated with potential Valemount migration loss. $240 million. The CFO reviewed the figure twice, then a third time. The room around him remained completely silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and distant phones ringing somewhere beyond the glass walls. Martin stood motionless beside the windows. No speeches now, no confidence, no laughter, just the terrible weight of delayed understanding. The CFO swallowed slowly. Legal confirmed something else. Martin didn't turn around. What? A pause. Then the sentence that emptied the room completely. She joined the competitor. Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that arrives after impact. The kind where every person present suddenly revisits old conversations, searching for the exact moment disaster still looked avoidable. Far below the tower, the city continued waking up. Traffic moved, cafes opened, people hurried beneath umbrellas toward jobs they hoped would value them a little longer. And inside another building across downtown, Emma Vale stood before a skyline glowing gold with sunrise. Calm, focused, already building the future her former company thought they could replace with two people like you. The irony was almost poetic. They were right about one thing. They would need at least two people now, maybe 20. But by then, it was already far too late.